There is a kind of arithmetic that only shows up later, long after the moment has passed, when you finally see what a thing actually cost and what it actually bought. On a wet Tuesday in western Pennsylvania, a woman working the paint counter of a hardware store put $11.62 of her own money onto a scratched laminate surface for a stranger she had never seen before and would probably never see again. 4 days later, she had lost her job, her apartment, and her name in the only town she had ever lived in. 11 months after that, she was standing in a welding bay, holding a certificate that changed the entire shape of her life. The arithmetic does not work. $11.62 does not buy a life. But it is what happened, and to understand how, you have to start earlier that same afternoon, about 40 miles east, at a gas station off a state highway, where a man named Keanu Reeves gave away every dollar of cash he had on him and told nobody, and then rode west into the rain with an empty wallet, and no idea that it mattered. Keanu Reeves was 60 years old that spring, and he had spent most of the previous 11 years running something that almost nobody outside a few counties had ever heard of. It was called the Second Shift Fund, and it did one narrow thing, which was to pay for trade certifications for adults who were already working. Not scholarships for 18-year-olds. Not four-year degrees. Certifications, welding, HVAC, commercial driving, phlebotomy, electrical, industrial maintenance. The kind of credential that takes somewhere between 4 and 11 months and costs somewhere between $800 and $4,000. And that, once you have it, moves a person from $11 an hour to $26. Keanu Reeves had started it after a long stretch of his own life that he did not talk about much, a period in his 30s when he had worked in shops and on crews and had watched a very specific thing happen over and over. He watched people who were good at their work stay poor because the fee for the exam was $600, and they did not have $600 and never would, because every dollar that came in went out again the same week, not because they were careless, because that is what it means to live at the bottom of a wage. There is no gap. The money enters and leaves through the same door, and there is never a Tuesday where you have $600 sitting still. So Keanu Reeves built a fund that paid the fee. That was the whole idea. It was not glamorous. It did not photograph well. Keanu Reeves put a great deal of his own money into it, and then a great deal of his own time. And by that spring, the Second Shift Fund had put something like 4,000 people through certifications across 9 states, and Keanu Reeves had made it a personal rule that he did not speak at any of the ceremonies. Keanu Reeves attended them. He attended almost all of them, but he sat in the back row, in the folding chairs nobody wants, and he did not introduce himself. And the directors of the programs had learned after the first 2 years to stop trying to get him to say a few words. He was not being humble in the performed way that wealthy people are sometimes humble, where the humility is itself a kind of announcement. He simply believed with total conviction that a room full of adults who had worked full shifts and then gone to class 4 nights a week for 11 months did not need a rich man to explain the meaning of their own accomplishment to them. They knew what it meant. They had paid for it in a currency he could not match. The most useful thing he could do was sit down, be quiet, and clap. That Tuesday, he was riding to one of those ceremonies. A program in a town called Halvern, about 90 miles west, was graduating its first cohort, 19 people, 11 of them welders. Keanu Reeves rode alone, on a motorcycle old enough to have opinions, wearing a jacket that had been good 15 years ago and was now merely waterproof in the places that mattered. Keanu Reeves had done this 100 times. He liked the road. He liked arriving at a strange town at dusk and finding a diner and sitting at the counter and being nobody at all. The gas station was about 40 miles out. It was one of those places with 4 pumps and a mini-mart and a fluorescent hum. And Keanu Reeves had stopped because the sky to the west had gone the color of a bruise and he wanted to top off the tank before the weather arrived. Keanu Reeves was at the register with a bottle of water when he noticed the woman ahead of him. She was maybe 38. She had a boy with her, small, maybe 6, sitting on the floor by the magazine rack with his back against the wall and his knees drawn up. What Keanu Reeves noticed first was not the woman, but the boys. Breathing. It had a sound to it, a thin pull at the top of each breath, a faint high whistle on the way out. And the boy was doing the thing that children with asthma learn to do without being taught, which is to sit very still and use as little of himself as possible. The woman was counting money onto the counter. Bills first, then coins. She counted it twice. The clerk waited with the flat patience of someone who has watched this exact scene many times. The item on the counter was a rescue inhaler. "I'm $11 short," the woman said. Her voice was very level, which is how people sound when they have decided in advance not to fall apart in a gas station. "Can you hold it? I can come back tonight." "I can hold it till close," the clerk said. "He needs it now," the woman said, still level. "He's been like this since we left my sister's." Keanu Reeves did not say anything dramatic. He did not make a speech about children and medicine and the state of a country where a mother counts coins for an inhaler. He stepped forward and put every bill in his wallet on the counter, which came to $63, and said, "This should cover it and the gas." The woman turned. There is a particular look people give you at a moment like that, a look with about 4 things in it at once. And the largest of them is not gratitude but shame, because our arrangement in this country is that needing help in public is humiliating. And Keanu Reeves had spent 11 years learning to move fast past that part. "Take it," he said. "The pump's still running on your car. Go, I can pay you back. If you give me a number, I can." "You don't need to. I'd like to." "I know," Keanu Reeves said. "You don't need to." Her name was Krista Vogel, though Keanu Reeves did not ask, and did not learn it until much later. And the boy on the floor was named Micah, and he was 6 years old. Krista Vogel took the inhaler and knelt down and shook it, and helped her son take 2 puffs and hold them. And the high whistle in the room went away, and the boy's shoulders came down about an inch. And Keanu Reeves paid for his water with the change in his jacket pocket and walked out into the parking lot, while the woman was still saying thank you to the space where he had been standing. Keanu Reeves had at that moment no cash at all. He had a debit card, a credit card, half a tank of gas, and 90 miles to go. Here is the part that matters, and it is the reason the entire rest of this story happened. Keanu Reeves used that card 3 times in 5 hours across 2 states. A tank of gas in one county, a sandwich in another, an inhaler and a fill-up at the gas station. And the last one had been rung up as a manual entry, because the card reader at the pump was broken. Somewhere in a data center, an algorithm designed to protect him noticed a pattern that looked like a stolen card moving fast across a map. And it did exactly what it had been built to do. It locked the account. It sent a text message to a phone that was in the inside pocket of a jacket, on silent, under a rain shell, on a man doing 60 on a state highway in the rain. The clutch cable went about 11 miles past that. It did not snap all at once, which is how those things usually go. It frayed, then it stretched, then the lever went soft in his hand, and Keanu Reeves got the bike onto the shoulder and stood in the rain and worked the lever twice, and understood that he was not riding any further today. Keanu Reeves was on a 2-lane road running through the low hills of western Pennsylvania, in a light, steady rain that had already gotten into his collar, at about 4 in the afternoon. There was a sign a half-mile back. Cottrell, 3 miles. Cottrell, Pennsylvania, was one of about 400 towns, and that part of the state that had once had a reason to exist and now mostly had inertia. There had been a plant. The plant had gone. What remained was a main street with a bank branch and a pizza place, and 2 churches. And out at the edge where the state route came in, a strip with a supermarket, a dollar store, and a hardware store called Loomis Home and Hardware. Keanu Reeves walked the bike about half of the 3 miles. And then, when his shoulder started to complain, he chained it to a guardrail and walked the rest, carrying his helmet under one arm. By the time he came through the door of Loomis Home and Hardware, at 11 minutes past 5 on a Tuesday afternoon, he had been walking in knee rain for 40 minutes. His hair was flat and dripping. His jacket had gone from dark gray to black across the shoulders. His boots left prints on the entry mat. He looked, and there is no other honest way to say it, like a man who had nowhere in particular to be and no particular way of getting there. Loomis Home and Hardware was one of 40 stores in a regional chain that had bought out the original family-owned business 11 years earlier and kept the name because the name was worth something in these towns. It had the layout every store like that has. Registers at the front left, paint counter in the back right, easels of plumbing and electrical and fasteners under fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. And at the back near the key cutting machine, a small counter with a hand-lettered sign that read, Tool Repair, ASK for Ellis. Ellis Roundtree was 71 years old and had worked in that building since he was 37. 34 years. He had worked for the Loomis family for the first 23 of them, and for the chain for the last 11. And in that time, he had cut something in the neighborhood of 90,000 keys and repaired what he estimated to be 4,000 tools. And he had watched the store change hands and change managers and change the color of the aprons 3 times. He also, and this will matter enormously later, kept a notebook. It was not a diary. Ellis Roundtree would have been embarrassed by the word. It was a small spiral-bound thing that lived in his apron pocket and got replaced about twice a year. And in it he wrote down, in a small square hand, the things a man who repairs machines writes down. Which tools came in, what was wrong with them, what parts he ordered, when the compressor was serviced, when the back door lock stuck, when a delivery came in short. He had started doing it in 1991 because a supplier had once told him a shipment had arrived when it had not. And Ellis Roundtree had had no way to prove otherwise, and had decided, in the quiet, stubborn way of a certain kind of man, that this would not happen to him twice. He had 34 years of those notebooks in a plastic bin in his basement. Tessa Brannon was 27 and had worked at Loomis Home and Hardware for 2 years. And 4 months, mostly at the paint counter, sometimes on a register when they were short. Before that, she had been a certified nursing assistant at a facility 1 town over, and she had been a good one. And she had left after 3 years because of the specific kind of grinding that happens when you are responsible for 11 residents on a shift staffed for 6. She had not left because she stopped caring. She had left because she had started to feel herself becoming a person who could not afford to care. And that had frightened her more than the exhaustion. She lived with her grandmother, Verna Brannon, who was 79, in a small house on Chapel Street that Verna had lived in since 1974. Tessa's mother was not in the picture, in a way that Tessa had stopped explaining to people. Around the time she turned 20, Verna had raised her. Verna had a bad hip and a stubborn streak and a habit of leaving the porch light on, no matter what time Tessa got home. And Tessa Brannon had, folded in the back pocket of her work jeans, a piece of paper she had been carrying for 11 months. It was an application. It had been printed on the library computer the previous June, and it was for a welding certification program at a technical school in Halvern, 90 miles west, that ran evening cohorts for working adults. She had done the arithmetic on it about 200 times. The program itself, tuition, was doable if she stretched. The problem was the fee structure at the end. The certification exam, the AWS qualification test, the materials, the equipment deposit. $1,640, due before the final module, non-refundable, no payment plan. She had $1,100 and change in a credit union savings account that she added to whenever she could and drained every time Verna's prescriptions went up. She had been at $1,100, roughly, for about 9 months. She could not get past it. Every time she got within $400 of the number, something happened. The water heater, the car. The dental thing Verna would not admit was a problem until it was, so the paper stayed in her pocket. She had carried it so long that it had gone soft at the folds, the way paper does, furry along the creases, the printed lines starting to break where the folds cross them. She did not take it out and look at it much anymore. She just knew it was there. Doyle Pritchard was 46 years old and had been the store manager of Loomis Home and Hardware in Cottrell for 4 years. It had taken him 20 to get there. He had started as a cart pusher at 19 at a store in another town and had gone to nights and then to receiving, and then to assistant, and then had spent 9 years as an assistant manager, watching people with community college degrees get moved past him. He had gotten his own store at 42. He was proud of it in a way that was not entirely healthy, because it was the only thing in his life that had gone the way he had planned. And that spring, Doyle Pritchard was in trouble in two separate ways that had begun to braid together. The first was official. Loomis Home and Hardware, the chain, had rolled out a new shrink metric the previous fall, and Cottrell's numbers were bad. Shrink is the retail word for inventory that leaves the building without being paid for, and it covers theft, damage, error, and a fourth category that nobody puts on a slide, which is money that disappears from the point of sale. Cottrell's shrink was running at nearly triple the chain average. Regional had noticed. Wade Tilghman, the regional man, had noticed loudly, twice, in writing. The second was not official. Doyle Pritchard's mother, Arlene, was 74, and had been in a memory care facility outside Pittsburgh for 2 years. The facility cost $4,800 a month. Her long-term care policy covered part of it. Her Social Security covered part of it. What remained after all of that was $1,140 a month, and Doyle Pritchard made $61,000 a year. And he had a mortgage and a daughter in her second year at a state school, and $1,140 a month was not a number he had. He had started 14 months earlier. Small. A void here, a refund override there. Register systems are built with a manager override function because sometimes a customer genuinely does need a return processed without a receipt, and the function requires a manager code, and the code is tied to an employee number, and every use of it writes a line to a log. Doyle Pritchard knew all of this. He was not stupid. What he had decided, in the way people decide things when they need to decide them, was that the log was enormous, and nobody read it, and that as long as he kept the amounts small and spread them out, it would look like noise. He had taken, over 14 months, a little over $19,000. And the shrink number that Wade Tilghman kept writing him letters about was, in significant part, him. So, on that Tuesday afternoon at 11 minutes past 5, when a soaking wet man in a 15-year-old motorcycle jacket walked into his store, carrying a helmet, Doyle Pritchard was standing near the front registers with a clipboard, 4 days out from a regional visit, with a shrink number he could not explain, and a reason for it he could not say out loud, looking for something in the world that he could control. Keanu Reeves went to the automotive aisle, found the universal clutch cable he needed on a peg hook, took it to the front, and got in line behind 2 other customers. The cable was $10.99. With Pennsylvania sales tax, $11.62. The woman at the register was Tessa Brannon, who was covering the front because the regular cashier had left at 4. Keanu Reeves put the cable on the counter and handed over his card. It came back declined. There is a specific quality to the sound a card reader makes when it declines a transaction, a flat 2-note tone. And everyone within 11 feet of a register knows exactly what that sound means. Keanu Reeves looked at the small screen. He said, "Can you run it again?" Tessa Brannon ran it again. Declined. "I've got another one," Keanu Reeves said, and handed her the credit card, which was on the same account with the same bank and the same fraud lock, and which came back declined in exactly the same way. Behind him, the line had grown to 4 people. "Do you have cash?" Tessa Brannon asked, not unkindly. Keanu Reeves opened his wallet and looked into it and found, folded behind an old insurance card, $1 bill. He checked his jacket pockets and came up with a quarter, a dime, and 2 pennies, $1.37. Now, at this point, there were several things Keanu Reeves could have said, and the fact that he said none of them is the whole shape of the man. He could have said that his account had been frozen by fraud detection because he had used it in 3 counties in 5 hours. He could have said that he had given away every dollar of cash in his wallet 90 minutes earlier to a woman at a gas station whose 6-year-old could not breathe. He could have said that he could buy the store. All 3 of those things were true. What Keanu Reeves said was, "I'm sorry. Let me call my bank." "Can you set it aside?" And that would have been the entire event. A small, unremarkable transaction failure of the kind that happens 40 a day in a country running on thin margins. Except that Doyle Pritchard had been watching from 11 feet away with a clipboard in his hand. He came over. He looked at the cable on the counter, and then he looked at the man in front of it, at the wet, flattened hair, and the old jacket black across the shoulders, and the boots that had left prints on his entry mat, and the helmet under his arm. And he made a decision about what he was looking at. Is there a problem here? Card's not going through, Tessa Brannon said. He's going to call his bank. I was going to hold the item. We don't hold items. It's $11, Doyle. It's a clutch cable. We don't hold items, Doyle Pritchard said again. And this time he said it to Keanu Reeves, and he said it at a volume calibrated for an audience. Sir, if you can't complete the purchase, I'm going to need you to step out of the line. I understand, Keanu Reeves said. I'll step aside and make the call. Outside. There was a pause then, about a second and a half long, and in it the four people in line stopped looking at their phones. It's raining, Tessa Brannon said. I'm aware of the weather. Doyle Pritchard turned back to Keanu Reeves. He had found at last in a very bad week a thing he could be certain about. Look, I've had people through that door all week. Coming in out of the rain, wandering the aisles, picking things up. We're not a charity. We're not a warming station. If you're not making a purchase, you need to be off the property. Keanu Reeves did not answer. He picked up his helmet, which he had set on the counter, and tucked it back under his arm. Ellis Roundtree had come up from the back of the store. He had been there 34 years, and he had a very specific radar for the tone a room takes on. And he was standing now at the end of the register bank, with a screwdriver still in his hand. Doyle, Ellis Roundtree said. Stay out of it, Ellis. Tessa Brannon looked at the man on the other side of her register. She saw the water still coming off the hem of his jacket onto the floor mat. She saw that he had not argued, had not raised his voice, had not said any of the things that people say. She saw that he had gone completely still, in the way that people go still when they have decided that the fastest way through something is to let it happen. And she thought about her grandmother's porch light. She would say later, when she was asked, that there had been nothing noble in it, that she had not made a decision so much as watched herself do something. She opened her own purse, which was under the register, and she took out the money that was in it, which was $17. And she counted $11.62 onto the laminate, and she rang the sale. It's covered, she said. Tessa, Doyle Pritchard said. It's my money, I can spend it. That is not how this works. He needs a clutch cable, Tessa Brannon said. He's got a broken bike out on the state route in the rain. It's $11. She put the cable in a bag and pushed it across the counter. And she looked up at the man and she said, in a voice pitched only for him, I'm sorry about this. Keanu Reeves took the bag. And then he did the thing that everyone in that store, all 6 of them, dismissed instantly as meaningless. And that would 11 weeks later take Doyle Pritchard's entire life apart. He said, could I have the receipt? Tessa Brannon tore it off the printer and handed it to him. Keanu Reeves looked at it for a second, and then he folded it in half and in half again, and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, the dry one, the one with the zipped, where he kept his phone. Doyle Pritchard made a small sound through his nose. Sure, keep the receipt. Big purchase. What's your name? Keanu Reeves asked. He was not looking at Doyle Pritchard when he asked it. He was looking at the woman behind the register. Tessa. Thank you, Tessa. He put the helmet on his head, and he went out through the automatic doors into the rain. And the doors closed behind him, and the whole thing had taken 4 minutes. Doyle Pritchard stood at the front of his store and looked at the 4 customers who were now, all of them, looking at him. He felt the specific heat of a man who has just been made smaller in public by someone he outranks. He turned to Tessa Brannon. My office, he said. Now. The office at the back of Loomis Home and Hardware was 11 feet by 9, with a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a monitor showing 4 core camera feeds in grainy quadrants. Doyle Pritchard sat down behind the desk. Tessa Brannon did not sit. Do you know what you did out there? I bought a man a clutch cable. You overrode a management decision in front of customers. I paid for something with my own money. At my register, in my store, in front of a line. Doyle Pritchard put his hands flat on the desk. You made me look like I was throwing a man out in the rain over $11. Tessa Brannon said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that would not have been the truth said out loud. And she had worked retail long enough to know the difference between a conversation and a formality. I need you to understand the position I'm in, Doyle Pritchard said. We have a regional visit Friday. Our shrink number is the worst in the district. The worst, Tessa. And regional is going to walk in here and ask me what kind of controls I'm running. And I am going to have to explain why my cashiers are running their own transactions off the books. It wasn't off the books. I rang it. There's a receipt. Something moved across Doyle Pritchard's face when she said the word receipt, and it was small, and neither of them understood it at the time. Go home, he said. You're off the schedule pending review. Doyle, go home. She went home. Verna had left the porch light on. What happened over the next 3 days is the part of this story that people tend to get wrong when they hear it secondhand, because they assume it was rage, and it was not. Doyle Pritchard was not a man in a rage. He was a man doing arithmetic in the dark at 2 in the morning, and the arithmetic went like this. Regional was coming Friday. Wade Tilghman was going to open the shrink report and ask directly what was driving a number that was almost triple the district average. And Doyle Pritchard had exactly one of two things he could put on that table. He could put the truth on it, which was $19,000 of manager override refunds spread across 14 months into his own pocket, and go to prison and lose his mother's bed at a facility that had a 9-month waiting list. Or he could put something else on it. Something else had just walked out of his store, carrying a bag with a clutch cable in it. And something else had a name, and the name was Tessa Brannon. It fit so well. That was the thing. It fit so well that Doyle Pritchard was able, over 3 sleepless nights, to arrange it in his own mind as something other than what it was. A cashier with access to a drawer. A cashier who had, in front of witnesses, taken money out of her purse and put it into a transaction, which meant a cashier who was demonstrably willing to move cash between herself and the register. A cashier whose behavior was, and he would use this exact word in the written statement, irregular. He did not have to invent very much. That was what he told himself. He only had to select. On Thursday, he wrote an incident report. In it, he described the Tuesday event, but he described it with the pieces rearranged. He wrote that a cashier had conducted an unauthorized transaction involving the exchange of personal funds and register funds, in violation of cash handling policy. He wrote that the employee had been observed in proximity to the drawer during a period of unreconciled variance. He wrote that a subsequent review of register logs showed a pattern of manager override refunds keyed at that terminal. And this sentence was, on its face, entirely true, and it was true because he had keyed every one of them himself. He did not write the word theft. He was careful about that. He wrote the phrase possible misappropriation, and he flagged the file for loss prevention review, and he attached a termination for cause. And on Friday morning, before Wade Tilghman's car was in the lot, Doyle Pritchard called Tessa Brannon into the same 11-by-9 office and told her she was terminated, effective immediately, for cash handling violations and suspected misappropriation of company funds. Tessa Brannon did not understand for a moment. She actually said, "What?" Not as an objection, but as a genuine question. The way you do when the words have not assembled yet. You'll be receiving a letter. There's a loss prevention review open. I'd advise you not to discuss it. Doyle. Her voice had gone strange. You think I stole money. I think there's a variance and there's a pattern, and I have an obligation to report it. I have worked here for 2 years. I'm aware. I bought a man a clutch cable. And here is where Doyle Pritchard did the thing that men like Doyle Pritchard always do. And that separates the ones who eventually come apart from the ones who merely fail. He did not say sorry. He did not say this is out of my hands, which would at least have been the coward's honesty. He looked at a 27-year-old woman he had worked beside for 2 years and 4 months, and he reframed the entire thing so that he was the one carrying a burden. "I've given this company 20 years, Doyle Pritchard said. 20 years. Do you know what that's worth? Nothing, if the numbers don't work. I have people above me who don't care about anything except the numbers. So don't stand there and act like I'm doing something to you. I'm doing my job. That's all any of us are doing." Brody Kaminsky was 22 and worked receiving, and he was standing in the hallway outside that office with a pallet jack, and he heard all of it. He did not say anything, not that day. Brody Kaminsky had been at Loomis Home and Hardware for 7 months. He had a car payment. His girlfriend was pregnant. He stood in the hallway with his hands on the pallet jack, and he listened to a woman he liked get accused of something he was almost certain she had not done. And he did the thing that most people do in that situation, which is nothing, and he would carry it. Tessa Brannon walked out of the store at 9:40 on a Friday morning through the same automatic doors. The wet man had gone out of 3 days earlier. Ellis Roundtree came around the end of an aisle as she passed and said her name. And she shook her head once and kept walking, because if she had stopped, she would not have made it to the car. Now, it would be a satisfying story if what happened next was that everything came apart for Doyle Pritchard immediately. That is not what happened. What happened next is that everything came apart for Tessa Brannon, and it did so in the specific procedural, grinding way that these things actually happen. And it is worth walking through carefully, because most people have never had to learn how it works. Pennsylvania, like almost every state in the country, is an at-will employment state. That phrase does a lot of quiet work. It means that an employer can end your employment at any time, for any reason or no reason, as long as the reason is not one of a small number of specifically protected categories. Being fired unfairly is not by itself illegal. Being fired for something you did not do is not by itself illegal. People are surprised by this, and then they are angry, and then they discover that the anger has nowhere to go. But it was not the firing that broke Tessa Brannon's life. It was the accusation. A termination for cash handling violations and suspected misappropriation does not stay in an office. It goes into an employment file. It goes into the reason field on a separation notice, which goes to the state unemployment office, which is why Tessa Brannon's unemployment claim was contested and denied on the grounds of willful misconduct. It goes into the answer a human resources department gives when a future employer calls to verify employment. And while most large companies will only confirm dates and title, the field is there, and people talk. And Cottrell, Pennsylvania has 4,100 people in it. And it goes into a loss prevention file, which is a document that exists in a corporate system and can be referenced. Within 11 days, Tessa Brannon had applied to 9 places. The supermarket at the other end of the strip, the dollar store, 2 restaurants, a distribution center 20 minutes out, a dental office looking for a front desk. She heard back from 3. She got 1 interview at the distribution center, and it went well, and the woman conducting it was warm and said they would move to the next step. And then 4 days later, Tessa Brannon received an email that said they had decided to move forward with other candidates. She never learned which of those 2 things it was, the reference or the town. That is the other part people do not understand. You do not get told. You just stop getting called back, and you are left to construct your own explanation. And the explanation you construct is always some version of everyone knows. The savings account, the $1,100 she had been unable to get past for 9 months, went in 6 weeks. Rent, Verna's prescriptions, the electric, the car insurance she could not drop because the car was the only way to get to a job she did not have. By the end of the 7th week, she was at $311, and the landlord who owned the house on Chapel Street, which Verna had rented since 1974 and had never once been late on, sent a notice. They did not become homeless. It is important to say that because the story is bad enough without making it worse than it was. Verna Brannon's church stepped in, the way small church communities in small towns still sometimes do, and a deacon named Royce made some calls. And Tessa and Verna moved in October into a 2-bedroom apartment above a shuttered pharmacy street, which was smaller and colder, and had a radiator that banged, and which was not their house. Verna Brannon did not complain about it once, which was worse than if she had. And Verna Brannon's health, which had been a steady managed decline of a bad hip and blood pressure, and the ordinary business of being 79, stopped being steady. She had a fall in November on the stairs of the new place, which had a turn in them that the house on Chapel Street had not had. She fractured her wrist. She was in a rehabilitation facility for 3 weeks. She came out of it moving slower, and in a way Tessa could see but could not describe to a doctor, smaller. That is the part of this story that does not get fixed. Not later, not by anyone. It is worth sitting with for a second before we go on, because the ending of this is going to be good. And the good endings does not reach back and undo November. Meanwhile, 90 miles west, a man had gone to a graduation. Keanu Reeves had gotten the clutch cable installed by a mechanic in Cottrell, who took a card that finally worked at 7 that evening. Once he had called the bank from the parking lot of the hardware store and spent 19 minutes on hold and confirmed that yes, the charges were his. Keanu Reeves had ridden the last of the way in the dark and arrived at Halvern at 10:40. He had sat in the back row of a community college multi-purpose room the following evening and watched 19 adults walk across a low stage, and he had clapped, and he had not spoken. And afterward, he had eaten a bad sandwich at a folding table and listened to a 51-year-old woman named Doreen tell him about the industrial maintenance job she was starting in 3 weeks at a bottling plant at $24 an hour. After 11 years of home health aid work at $11.50, Keanu Reeves had not thought much about Cottrell. That is honest. It had been an unpleasant 4 minutes in a bad week, and he had experienced a version of it before. And Keanu Reeves had spent a long time cultivating a specific discipline about not carrying other people's contempt around with him. What Keanu Reeves had thought about, on and off, was the cashier. Because there is a thing that happens when someone does something small and costly for you, which is that it is very hard to put down. $63 at a gas station had cost Keanu Reeves nothing. $11.62 at a register in Cottrell had, he suspected, cost that woman something real. And she had done it while her manager was standing 11 feet away, making it clear what it would cost her. And Keanu Reeves had walked out of the store without being able to do anything about it. So 11 days later, when the funds business took him back east on that road, he stopped in Cottrell. Keanu Reeves had $200 in an envelope in his jacket, which was, he understood, a slightly ridiculous thing to be carrying, and a thank you note he had rewritten twice and was still not happy with. Keanu Reeves came in through the automatic doors at 2 in the afternoon on a dry day, in dry clothes, and went to the front and looked for the woman with the dark hair who had rung his cable. She was not there. Keanu Reeves went to the paint counter. There was a young man mixing a gallon of eggshell who did not look up. "I'm looking for someone who worked here. Tessa." The young man did look up then. He was 22, with a receiving apron and a company polo, and his face did something complicated. "She doesn't work here anymore. Do you know where she went?" "No." And then, after a pause that lasted about 2 seconds too long, Brody Kaminsky said, "She got fired." Keanu Reeves went very still. "When?" "Like a week and a half ago. The Friday." Brody Kaminsky looked past him toward the front of the store, and Keanu Reeves understood the geometry of that glance immediately. "Look, I can't. I've got. I'm not supposed to talk about it. I understand." "It wasn't right," Brody Kaminsky said, very fast and very quietly. And then he went back to the paint shaker and turned it on, which is a loud machine, and that was the end of that conversation. Keanu Reeves stood in the aisle for a moment. Then he went to the back of the store, to the counter with the hand-lettered sign, where an old man was rebuilding the head on a cordless drill. "Are you Ellis?" "I am. I was in here 11 days ago, in the rain. My card wouldn't go through." Ellis Roundtree set down the drill. He looked at Keanu Reeves for a long moment, taking in the whole of him, the way a man who has spent 34 years assessing what is actually wrong with a machine looks at a thing. "I remember you. The woman who paid for my cable. I came back to pay her back. You're about 11 days late." "So I'm learning." Ellis Roundtree wiped his hands on a rag that had not been cleaned since the Clinton administration. He looked toward the front of the store, and then he did a thing that Keanu Reeves would think about for a long time afterward. He took off his apron, folded it once, set it on the workbench, and said, "I take my break at 2:30. There's a bench out by the propane cage." Nobody goes out there. At 2:30 on a bench beside a propane cage in the parking lot of a hardware store in Cottrell, Pennsylvania, a 71-year-old tool repairman told a 60-year-old stranger everything he knew, which was more than anyone realized. He told him that Tessa Brannon had been terminated the Friday after the incident. He told him the stated reason, cash handling violations and suspected misappropriation. And he watched the tree's face when he said the word misappropriation and noted that nothing happened on it at all, which told him something. And then Ellis Roundtree said the thing that turned this from a sad story into a different kind of story. "That girl didn't take a dime," he said, "and I'll tell you how I know. It isn't loyalty. I've known plenty of people who'd take. I know it because I've been watching money walk out of that store for over a year, and it wasn't walking out through her register. Tell me, you know what a manager override is? Tell me anyway." So Ellis Roundtree explained it, in the plain, unhurried way of a man explaining a mechanism. Every register has a function for transactions that fall outside the normal path. A return with no receipt. A price adjustment. A voided sale after the drawer has opened. Because those functions can move money out of a drawer without a corresponding item scan, they are locked behind a manager code. Every manager has one, tied to their employee number. And every single time one of those codes is entered, the system writes a line into a log with the terminal number, the employee number, the amount, and a timestamp accurate to the second. Nobody reads the log, Ellis Roundtree said. That's the thing. It's 400 lines a week. It goes into the system and it sits there. Unless somebody has a reason to pull it. And you've been reading it. I can't read it. I don't have access to it. Ellis Roundtree almost smiled. But I've been in that building 34 years, and I close on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I count what comes back into the tool crib, and I've had my own book since 1991. Your own book. Ellis Roundtree reached into his back pocket and took out a spiral notebook, small, soft-cornered, about half full. He held it up. Twice a year I fill one. I've got 68 of them in a bin in my basement. He put it back in his pocket. Starting about 14 months ago, the drawer counts on the closing shifts I work started coming up light. Not much. $40. 60, once 110. And every one of those nights, the store had a manager override entered before the shift change, because I could see the drawer report come off the printer, and I could see the line on it. I don't know what the code was or who keyed it, but I wrote down the date and the amount every single time, because that's what I do. How many times? Since last March. Ellis Roundtree looked out at the parking lot. 41. Keanu Reeves sat on a bench beside a propane cage and thought for a while. Why didn't you report it? And Ellis Roundtree gave him an answer that was not noble at all, and that was for exactly that reason, completely believable. Because I'm 71, he said. Because I've got 14 months to Medicare eligibility on a spouse who has multiple sclerosis, and this job carries the insurance. Because reporting it means walking in Tuffin, that office, and telling Doyle Pritchard that I think somebody's stealing. And there are 2 people in this building with a manager code, and one of them is Doyle Pritchard. He rubbed his thumb along the seam of his trousers, so I wrote it down, every time. And I told myself that writing it down was doing something. He looked at Keanu Reeves directly for the first time. It wasn't. Not until right now, maybe. There is a thing that happens when a person who has been carrying something alone finally sets it down in front of somebody who does not flinch. Ellis Roundtree, 71 years old, 34 years in the same building, sat on a bench in a parking lot and finished his break 4 minutes late. Keanu Reeves said, I'm going to need to know where she lives. Chapel Street. Little white house with a porch. But I heard they moved. Then I'll find her. Mister, Ellis Roundtree said, I don't know who you are. I'm somebody who owes her $11.62. Keanu Reeves said, and he took the folded receipt out of the inside pocket of his jacket, the dry one with the zip, where it had been sitting for 11 days. And he unfolded it and looked at the date and the time and the terminal number, and the line that said Clutch Cabal Univ, and the total and the word cash. And he folded it again and put it back. Tessa Brannon met Keanu Reeves for the second time on a Thursday afternoon in the parking lot of the Cottrell Public Library. Because she did not want a stranger coming to the apartment above the pharmacy where her grandmother was sleeping in the front room. She had almost not come. A man had called her, having gotten the number from a church deacon by way of a tool repairman, and it had said he was the person she had bought a clutch cable for, and that he wanted to talk. Her first thought had been that it was a scam. Her second thought, which arrived with a kind of exhausted flatness, was that there was nothing left to scam out of her. Keanu Reeves was standing by a motorcycle with his helmet on the seat, dry this time. She recognized him anyway, immediately, and the recognition came with a hot flare of something she did not expect, which was resentment. And she was honest enough with herself to notice it. "I want to say up front," Keanu Reeves said, "that I know 11 days is a long time, and I know what happened to you, and I know that my being here is not going to feel like enough." "You didn't do anything," Tessa Brannon said. "He did. I was there. You were buying a cable." She folded her arms. "Look, I don't want money. Somebody said you wanted to pay me back. It was $11. Keep it." "That's not why I called you." "Then why?" And Keanu Reeves said, "Because I think I can prove you didn't take anything, and I think you should have a lawyer. And I'd like to pay for one, and if you say no, I'll leave you alone, and that's the end of it." Tessa Brannon stood in a library parking lot in October and did not answer for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" It was the same question the woman at the gas station had asked, in different words. And it always came, and Keanu Reeves had never gotten better at answering it. "Because I watched you spend money you needed on a stranger," he said. "And it cost you everything, and I'm not able to walk around with that. That's not a reason. It's the only one I've got." Corinne Faust was 52, practiced employment law out of a two-room office in a county seat 40 minutes from Cottrell, and had the specific manner of a lawyer who spends most of her professional life telling people that what happened to them was terrible and also not illegal. She sat across from Tessa Brannon in a conference room with a water stain on the ceiling and laid it out with no cushioning at all, which Tessa Brannon would later say was the first time in 2 months anyone had treated her like an adult. "Here's where you are," Corinne Faust said. "Pennsylvania is at will. They can fire you because they don't like your shoes. So the termination itself, we're probably not touching. That's the bad news, and I want it out of the way first. Okay, the good news, and it's real, is that they didn't just fire you. They put a reason on it. Suspected misappropriation of company funds." Corinne Faust tapped the separation notice. The moment they put that in writing and communicated it, we're in different territory. That's a statement of fact about you. It's damaging on its face. And if it's false, and they knew or should have known it was false, we have something. It also means your unemployment denial is appealable, because willful misconduct has to be proven, not asserted. So what do? We do the thing that everybody skips. Because it's boring, Corinne Faust said. We send a preservation letter. She explained it. A litigation hold notice, sent to the company's legal department, formally notifying them that a dispute is anticipated and that they are now obligated to preserve all relevant records. Register logs, point-of-sale transaction data, personnel files, written communications, and critically video. Camera systems in retail generally overwrite on a loop, Corinne Faust said. 30 days is standard, sometimes 45. We're at day 63 from the incident and day 52 from the termination, which means the incident footage is gone and probably the termination footage too. But the log data doesn't overwrite. Log data sits on a server till somebody deletes it deliberately, and deleting it deliberately after a preservation letter is spoliation of evidence, which is the single fastest way to lose a case you might otherwise have won. So they'll just have to hand over the logs. They'll have to preserve them. Whether we get to see them depends on what happens next. Corinne Faust looked up. And here's the thing I want you to understand, because most clients don't. This letter is going to feel like a small piece of paper. It is not. Right now, whatever happened at that store is one manager's story. The second this letter lands, it becomes a corporate compliance matter, and corporations do not protect store managers. They protect themselves. The preservation letter went out on a Tuesday, and now we have to talk about the poster. Tessa Brannon had been going to the Cottrell Public Library nearly every day for 2 months because it had free internet heat, because it had free internet and heat, and because sitting in the apartment with her grandmother watching her, not complain, was harder than almost anything else. She used the computers to apply for jobs. She had done this so many times that she had the tab order memorized. The library had a community bulletin board in the entryway, the kind with a cork surface and 40 layers of staples in it. And on it were the things such boards always have: a lost cat, a snowplowing service, a church spaghetti dinner, a 4-H meeting, and in the lower right corner, half covered by a flyer for a firewood delivery, a single sheet of paper that had been up since the previous February. It said the second shift fund across the top. Below that, it said in plain type, "We play the fee." And below that, certification exam fees, materials, and equipment deposits for working adults enrolled in accredited trade programs. No age limit. No degree required. No repayment. Applications accepted year-round. And at the bottom, a web address and a phone number with a Pittsburgh area code. Tessa Brannon had walked past that board, something like 90 times. She stopped in front of it on a Wednesday in late October for a reason she was never able to reconstruct afterward, and she read the sheet, and she felt the paper in the back pocket of her jeans, the one that had gone soft at the folds, the welding program application she had been carrying for 11 months, and could not use because of a $1,640 fee she was never going to be able to save, while also being alive. She took the flyer off the board. She went to a computer. She typed in the web address, and on the third page of the site, under a heading that said, "Who We Are," there was a small paragraph about the fund's founding and a name. Tessa Brannon sat in the Cottrell Public Library and looked at a computer screen for a very long time. She called him that night. "Did you know?" she said when he picked up. "When you were standing in the parking lot. Did you know I had an application in my pocket?" There was a pause on the line. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The second shift fund." Another pause, longer. "Ah," Keanu Reeves said. 11 months. I've had it 11 months. I couldn't get past 1640. Her voice was doing something she could not control. "You've been driving past that library. There's a poster. There's a poster on the board by the door. There's a poster in about 400 libraries. You didn't say anything." "No, why not?" And Keanu Reeves said the thing that was, in a certain light, the entire architecture of the man. "Because you'd already done the thing," he said. "If I'd told you in that parking lot that I run a fund that pays exam fees, then every conversation we ever have after that is you wondering whether I helped you because you helped me. I didn't want you to have to wonder that. You didn't buy that cable to get anything. I wasn't going to turn it into a transaction. But I applied to you," Tessa Brannon said. "I applied to you. Last June. There's an application in my pocket that I never sent because I thought the fee was the part I had to cover. That's the most common mistake people make with us," Keanu Reeves said. "The fee is the part we cover. That's the only thing we do." Tessa Brannon sat down on the floor of an apartment above a shuttered pharmacy and cried for about 4 minutes, which was the first time she had done it since the Friday in the office. And then she stopped and wiped her face and said, "Okay, tell me how to apply." She was approved in 9 days. The fund did not require a job. It required enrollment. But the accusation was still there, and an accusation of theft is a thing that follows a person into every room they will ever enter. And none of the rest of it was going to matter unless it came off. The company's response to the preservation letter came from a corporate legal department in Ohio and was 3 paragraphs long and said, in the flat, courteous language of these things, that Loomis Home and Hardware took the matter seriously, that an internal review had been conducted, that the separation was based on documented policy violations, and that the company considered the matter closed. The internal review had been conducted by a loss prevention analyst who had spent about 4 hours on it, had pulled the shrink summary for the Cottrell store, had noted that the variance predated Tessa Brannon's termination and continued in a similar pattern after it, and had written a 2-page memo concluding that the most probable explanation for the store's shrink was a known point-of-sale software issue. This is the part where the whole thing very nearly ended. And it is worth slowing down for, because it is the part that is true to how these things actually go. The point-of-sale software issue was real. It existed. The chain had rolled out a system update the previous February, and there was a documented bug in the return processing module that, under specific conditions involving split tender transactions, could write a duplicate line into the variance report and make a single refund appear as two. The chain had issued a patch in September. There were 40 stores in the chain, and 31 of them had reported variance anomalies during that window. It was, in other words, a perfect explanation. It was documented. It was chain-wide. It was nobody's fault. It made a difficult number go away. And it allowed a corporate legal department to write the phrase considered the matter closed. Doyle Pritchard read that memo in his office in November and understood that he had, through no skill of his own, been handed the thing he needed most, which was a reason that was not a person. He should have stopped there. That is the thing that Marisol Duarte would say later. And she said it without any particular judgment, the way you would observe that a man who was standing in the road had been given the chance to step out of it. If Doyle Pritchard had stopped in November, if he had let the software bug absorb the variance and let Tessa Brannon disappear into the general wreckage of a small town, it is entirely possible that none of this would ever have come apart. The $19,000 would have been noise inside a chain-wide anomaly. Corinne Faust would have had a defamation claim with no evidence and a client with no money and would have advised her to settle for a corrected separation notice and $9,000. And Tessa Brannon would have taken it because she would have had to. But Corinne Faust filed the unemployment appeal. It was a small thing. It was a hearing in a rented room in a county building, before a referee, with no jury and no press, and a maximum exposure to the company of about $4,000 in benefits. Loomis Home and Hardware sent no lawyer. They sent a store manager with a folder. And Doyle Pritchard, sitting in a rented room in a county building in December, was asked by a referee to state the basis for the finding of willful misconduct. And he panicked, and instead of retreating, he escalated. He said, under oath, that on the day in question the employee had removed cash from the register drawer and had converted it to personal use, and that this had been observed by him directly. He had, until that sentence, been on the survivable side of a line. He had written a report full of insinuations that were technically defensible. He had used the phrase suspected misappropriation, which is a phrase built specifically so that it can be walked back. Now he had told a state adjudicator on the record a specific factual claim about a specific event, and the specific factual claim was that a woman had taken money out of a drawer. Corinne Faust, who had brought exactly one document to that hearing, took it out of a folder and asked to enter it into the record. It was a photograph of a receipt. The receipt showed a sale at Terminal 2 at 5:31 p.m. on a Tuesday in September for one universal clutch cable, $10.99, tax 63 cents, total $11.62, tendered cash, change due 0. It showed the transaction number and the cashier ID. It was, in every respect, an ordinary sale, correctly rung, correctly tendered, with the drawer balancing to the penny. Mr. Pritchard, Corinne Faust said, is this the transaction you're describing? It appears to be. You testified that the employee removed cash from the drawer. This document shows cash going into the drawer in the exact amount of the sale. Would you agree that money moving into a register is the opposite of money moving out of it? Doyle Pritchard said that he was describing a pattern, not a single transaction. Then let's talk about the pattern, Corinne Faust said, because I've subpoenaed the override log. Here is what nobody in that room knew, including Corinne Faust, who was working on instinct and thin evidence. Doyle Pritchard had assumed for 14 months that nobody read the log. And he had been right, and the reason he had been right is that nobody had ever had a reason to. A subpoena is a reason. The unemployment referee ruled for Tessa Brannon in 11 days and restored her benefits, which mattered enormously to her, and not at all to the rest of this. What mattered was that a sworn statement now existed, which was contradicted by a document, and Corinne for Faust sent that transcript and that receipt to the corporate legal department in Ohio with a cover letter that used the words material misrepresentation by a company agent in a state proceeding, and a corporate legal department in Ohio, which had considered the matter closed, unclosed it in about 90 minutes. Marisol Duarte was 38 and had done corporate loss prevention investigations for 11 years. And when the Cottrell file landed on her desk in January, she did what she always did, which was to ignore everyone's theory and pull the raw data. The override log for the Cottrell store covered 16 months and was, as Ellis Roundtree had said, about 400 lines a week. Marisol Duarte did not read it. She sorted it. The software bug, the one that had explained everything, had a signature. Duplicated lines from split tender returns. It produced pairs. When Marisol Duarte filtered for that signature, she found it, exactly as documented, in 31 stores including Cottrell, and it accounted for a meaningful amount of variance. It did not account for all of Cottrell's. What remained, after the bug was subtracted, was a residue of 211 manager override refunds, no receipt, small amounts, ranging from $31 to $140, spread across 14 months. Every one of them was keyed under employee number 4471. That alone was not conclusive. Doyle Pritchard was the store manager. He keyed overrides legitimately all day long, and a store that size might reasonably generate hundreds of them. So Marisol Duarte did the second thing, which is the thing that actually caught him. And it is worth understanding, because it is beautiful in a cold sort of way. She plotted them against time. Legitimate overrides scatter. They happen when customers happen, which is to say randomly across operating hours, with a fat lump around midday and another around 6. That is what human retail traffic looks like. The 211 did not scatter. They clustered. Every single one of them had been keyed between 4:48 p.m. and 5 p.m., a 12-minute window, on days when the closing shift changed at 5. No software does that. Software does not know when the shift changes. Software does not prefer 12 minutes. Marisol Duarte drove to Cottrell in February and interviewed everyone in the building. And the interview that ended it took 40 minutes and happened at a workbench near a key cut machine, where a 71-year-old man in an apron listened to her explain who she was, and then said, "Hold on," and went out to his truck and came back with a plastic bin, 68 spiral notebooks. 34 years. He had flagged the relevant one with a folded piece of masking tape. 41 closing shifts, dated, each with a drawer count, each with the amount short, in a small square hand, going back 14 months. Marisol Duarte compared Ellis Roundtree's 41 dates against her own filtered list. 41 for 41. Why did you keep this? She asked him. Because in 1991 a fella told me a delivery came in that didn't, Ellis Roundtree said. I couldn't prove otherwise. Didn't care for the feeling. Doyle Pritchard did not confess. He never confessed, not at any point, not once. And this is the part people find hardest to accept, because we are trained by stories to expect a breaking point. When Marisol Duarte sat him down in his own 11-by-9 office with the log and the notebooks and the 12-minute window, he did not weep. He explained. He explained that the overrides were legitimate, that the clustering reflected end-of-day reconciliation practice, that Ellis Roundtree was a 71-year-old man with a grudge who had been passed over for a shift lead position in 2019, that the entire matter was being driven by a terminated employee and an attorney with a financial interest. When Marisol Duarte pointed out that no reconciliation practice generates a no-receipt refund, he said that she did not understand how stores actually operate. When she asked him directly whether he had taken money from the register, he said, and these were his exact words, which are in the file, I gave this company 20 years. He was suspended in February and terminated in March. The chain referred the matter to the county district attorney in April. There was, eventually, a plea and a sentence that involved probation and a restitution order for $19,480, payable at a rate that would take him until he was 63. He never apologized to Tessa Brannon. Not in the courtroom, not by letter, not through counsel. Corinne Faust told her to expect that, and she was right, and it still landed badly when it did not come. The civil matter settled in June. Loomis Home and Hardware corrected the separation notice to a neutral separation, issued a written retraction of the misappropriation finding to be provided to any party who had received the original, and paid a sum that was confidential and that Corinne Faust described to Tessa Brannon as adequate and not enough. And here is the part that the settlement could not do and that nobody could do, and that Tessa Brannon learned about 6 weeks later when she applied for a position at a hospital supply company and was asked, in the interview, about a gap and a prior termination. A retraction does not delete anything. The original separation notice existed. It went to the state. It went into a background check aggregator that had scraped the unemployment contest record. There is no central authority you can call to reach into every database in the country and remove a sentence. Corinne Faust spent 4 months and a considerable amount of the settlement getting the record amended at the 4 largest aggregators, and got it done at 3, and the 4th never responded to anything, ever, from anyone. Tessa Brannon has been asked about it in every job interview she has had since. She has an answer she has gotten good at giving. She should never have needed one. Verna Brannon's wrist healed. Verna Brannon did not go back to the way she had been before the fall on the stairs of an apartment they had to move into. She used a walker after that. She died 2 years later, at 81, in her own bed in a rented house, which Tessa Brannon says was the one thing she got back, and which cost more than anyone should have to pay for it. Ellis Roundtree retired in the fall at 72, 14 months after that conversation on the bench, with the insurance intact and his wife stable. The chain gave him a plaque. He kept the plaque in the garage. He kept the 68 notebooks in the basement, where they had always been, and added one more. Brody Kaminsky, who had stood in a hallway with a pallet jack and said nothing, called Corinne Faust in January, before Marassos Duarte ever came to town, and gave a statement about what he had heard through an office door. He did it 11 weeks late, and he did it anyway. And Tessa Brannon, who could have made him carry that, called him afterward and told him it counted. He still works there. He is a supervisor now. Doyle Pritchard's mother, Arlene, was moved out of the memory care facility outside Pittsburgh in April, when the payments stopped, to a county facility with a shared room and a 2-to-1 staffing ratio worse than where she had been. This is the part of the story that has no satisfaction in it at all. The thing he stole for, he lost, and he lost it because of the stealing. And there is no version of the arithmetic where his mother comes out ahead. He visits her on Sundays. She does not always know him. There was one night, the following winter, in a rented room in a town where nobody knew him, when Doyle Pritchard sat with the television off and understood, completely, and without any of the architecture he had built, what he had actually done. Not the money. He had made his peace with the money in the way a man does. What he understood was that on a Tuesday afternoon in September, he had needed, very badly, to be in charge of something. And the thing he had found to be in charge of was a wet man with $1.37 and a cashier who had $11 in her purse, and that everything after that had been the sound of him, trying not to look at it. He did not do anything with the understanding. That is the thing about arriving late. There is nothing to do with it when you get there. Tessa Brannon started the welding program in Halvern in January, driving 90 miles each way, 4 nights a week, in a car that made a noise she had learned to live with. The second shift fund paid the exam fee, the materials, and the equipment deposit, $1,640, which was the entire distance between her life and a different one. She passed her structural certification on a Thursday in November, 14 months after a manager told her to go home. She is a fabricator at a company that makes tank and vessel components, and she makes $31 an hour, and she has insurance. And she bought a house on the other side of Cottrell in her second year, which is not the house on Chapel Street, and is a house. Keanu Reeves was at the certification ceremony. Keanu Reeves sat in the back row, in the folding chairs nobody wants. And he did not speak, because Keanu Reeves never spoke, and the program director had long since stopped asking. Tessa Brannon knew he was there. She had made him promise to come, and he had made her promise not to introduce him, and both of them kept it. Afterward, there was a folding table with a coffee urn and a supermarket sheet cake, and the graduates stood around in the awkward way day people do. And one of them, a 56-year-old man who had spent 19 years driving a forklift, was telling a story with his hands. And Keanu Reeves stood at the edge of it and listened and ate a piece of cake off a paper plate. Tessa Brannon came over at the end and said, "I want to give you something. You don't. It's not money." She took it out of her jacket pocket. It was a piece of paper, folded into quarters, furry along all the creases where the folds crossed. The printed lines broken through at the intersections softened the way paper gets when it has lived in a pocket through 11 months of one life, and then another 2 years of a different one, the original application, the one she had printed at the library and carried and never sent. "I kept it," she said. "I don't know why. I had the real one, the one I actually filed. But I kept this." Keanu Reeves unfolded it. It came apart a little at the center where the two creases met. "I want you to have it," Tessa Brannon said. "Why?" "Because you're going to keep doing this for 4,000 more people," she said. "And you're going to sit in the back row every time and not say anything. And I want there to be one thing that you have to carry. I keep coming back to the folds. Not the courtroom, not the override log, not the 12-minute window that took a man apart. The piece of paper Tessa Brannon carried in the back pocket of her work jeans for 11 months. And the specific way paper goes when you carry it that long. The creases turn furry. The printing breaks where the folds cross. It stops being a document and becomes an object, because you already know what it says. And what it says is that there is a door, and you cannot afford the handle. I keep thinking about what it takes to keep carrying a thing like that. Not hope. Hope would have made her send it. Something more stubborn and less optimistic than hope that puts the paper back in the pocket after every wash and every shift and every time the savings got close and then went to a water heater. She could not use it and she would not lose it. Keanu Reeves has it now. That seems right to me. While this story is fictional, the lessons about how a single accusation can follow a person into every room they enter for the rest of their life, and how little it costs to make one, are very real. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the Don't link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.